Hi there. My name's Maggie Marconi. I'm the museum administrator for the Follett House Museum, which is a branch of the Sandusky Library. We're at beautiful Oakland Cemetery in Perkins Township in Sandusky, Ohio. Today we're going to take a walk around Oakland Cemetery and we're going to explore a little bit about Civil War heroes. Come on, let's go. We're at the grave of Louis Traub. Louis Traub was born in Germany and came to this country around 1844. He initially settled in New York City, where he worked as a tailor, and around 1847 came to Ohio. When he was in Sandusky, he continued his work as a tailor, and he also ran a restaurant. Before the Civil War, Louis Traub was instrumental in forming the Jaeger Company. The Jaeger Company was an early militia made up of men primarily of German descent. When the Civil War came to pass, the Jaeger Company was the basis for the 107th Volunteer Infantry, led by Captain Traub. We're at the grave of Charles Batz. Charles Batz was born in Germany in 1836. He came to this country in 1854. He was the principal musician for Company A of the 128th Ohio Volunteer Infantry. That was the unit that was stationed at Johnson's Island Prison Camp, which is in Sandusky Bay. He was the principal musician for the military band there. He played the violin and also the cornet. We're at the grave of Charles Barney Dennis. Charles Barney Dennis was born in New York and moved to Sandusky when he was 9 years old. As a young boy, he worked on farms, and in 1862, when he was 19, he enlisted in Company B of the 101st Ohio Volunteer Infantry, and he served until he was discharged in 1865. He was in battle at Stones Creek when he was shot in the hip. The Confederates quickly overtook the field he was in, and he was taken prisoner with a wound. There was a hospital behind enemy lines, and he was quickly treated by the Union soldiers, and then he was put to work by the Union doctors helping to identify the dead and the wounded. He did eventually recuperate. As soon as he was ambulatory, he took an oath that he would not take up arms against the Confederates. He broke that oath within 2 days. If he had been caught, he could have been executed. Morris Darnell was born in 1834. According to his military records, he stood 5 feet 10.5 inches tall, and his occupation was barber. Morris Darnell was an African-American man who joined the Massachusetts 55th Regiment. Prior to the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, Morris Darnell was unable to join the Army, but when Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, it enabled African-American men to join the Army. Morris Darnell was one of 26 men from Sandusky who signed up and joined the Massachusetts 55th. When he was at James Island, South Carolina, he was injured. He was shot in the hand. He was granted a medical furlough to recuperate. The medical furlough wasn't quite long enough, so he requested and received an additional furlough. Unfortunately, he didn't know that he needed to tell his commanding officer. So while he was at home recuperating on his furlough that had been granted, he was being counted absent back at the camp. When he returned to the camp, the error was discovered, and he was allowed back to duty without being docked pay or having to go to trial. Morris Darnell died a young man. He died at age 44 of consumption, which today we know is tuberculosis. We're at the grave of Emma Jean Niver Marshall. Emma Jean Niver Marshall's life was highly influenced by the fate of her brother Edwin. Edwin was born in 1844 in Huron County, and when he was not yet 17 years old, he enlisted in the Army. He was taken prisoner and was held at Andersonville Prison, where he died of starvation. He wrote a number of letters home, which Emma Jean Niver Marshall compiled into a book. She wrote a lengthy poem about the boys who lost their lives at Andersonville, which she read at a monument to Ohio State soldiers at Andersonville Prison. She was very active in caring for veterans of the Civil War and was very well known at the Soldiers and Sailors Home, which today we know as the Ohio Veterans Home. Emma Jean Niver Marshall died in 1935. We're at the grave of Robert and Anna McMeans. Robert McMeans was born in 1820, and he graduated from the University of Pennsylvania Medical School in 1841. Shortly after he graduated from medical school, he moved to Tiffin, Ohio, which was where he met his wife, Anna. During the Mexican War, he served as a surgeon, and back in Sandusky, he formed the Bay City Guards, an early militia group. When the Civil War broke out, Dr. McMeans again took up the call and served as a Civil War surgeon. He worked tirelessly, and in fact, although his colleagues begged him to stop working, he knew that there was so much work to be done that he continued to work and collapsed and died from exhaustion on the field. After Dr. McMeans' death, Mrs. McMeans continued to be active with veterans and veterans' rights. She spent more than a year in Washington, D.C. working in hospitals at the bedsides of wounded soldiers. When she came back, she was very active in veterans' rights and veterans' care here in the city of Sandusky. As an older woman, she worked for Jay Cook, and Jay Cook clearly thought the world of her. At her death, he mentioned that every year she would send him a stack of receipts 6 inches thick that detailed all of the receipts that she had paid while she was working at his Cook Castle on Gibraltar Island. He said he trusted her so much that he never once opened a single bundle. We're at the grave of J. Caldwell Butler. J. Caldwell Butler was a Sandusky native. He was born here in 1844. He enlisted in Company B of the 101st Ohio Volunteer Infantry. At the Battle of Nashville in 1864, he was wounded. Unfortunately, he lay in the field for several days before he received medical attention, and you can imagine that he never fully recovered. He did return to Sandusky after the Civil War and was in business with his family. In 1930, his son gathered up his letters that he had written and put them into a book which he called Letters Home. J. Caldwell Butler died in Sandusky. We're at the grave of Isaac Skillman. Isaac Skillman was from a pioneer family of Sandusky, and he registered in Company B of the 3rd Ohio Cavalry. After the Civil War was over, Isaac sat down and spent some time recollecting his experiences in the Civil War, which he wrote out by longhand. He detailed many of his experiences, including his experience at the Battle of Shiloh. We're at the grave of Foster Morse Follett. Foster Follett was born in Gorham, New York in 1801. You might recognize the Follett name. He was the brother of Orrin Follett. He likely came to Sandusky around the same time as Orrin Follett, probably in the 1830s. He was active in area politics. He served 2 separate terms as auditor. He served as the recorder of the city, and he also served as the mayor of Sandusky during the terrible cholera epidemics. During the Civil War, Foster Follett was part of the Hoffman Battalion, and he was detailed to lead an exchange of prisoners to Vicksburg. During their travels south, he contracted a disease, and although he was quite ill, he pressed on to Vicksburg and then returned home. He never recuperated from the disease that he picked up on his way to Vicksburg and died shortly after his return. We're at the grave of Leonard Johnson. Leonard Johnson was born in County Wexford, Ireland in 1807. When he was a young boy in 1822, he and his family migrated to North America. They first settled in Montreal, and in 1831, he moved to Sandusky, where he spent the rest of his life. Leonard Johnson was a businessman in Sandusky, and he bought Bull Island. Today, of course, we know it as Johnson's Island, but when he purchased it, he changed the name to Johnson's Island. When the Civil War broke out, the United States government sent out a scout looking for an ideal location to build a new prison camp for Confederate officers. The scout searched all around the Great Lakes area, and when he sent back his report to Washington, D.C., he recommended Johnson's Island. It had a lot to recommend. It had a 40-acre spot that had already been cleared. It was easy to reach by rail in Sandusky. It was just far enough away that it was a good place to keep prisoners. It wasn't too close to Canada, as well as a large stockpile of trees, lumber that included hickory and oak that they could use for building as well as for keeping them warm in the stoves in the wintertime. Leonard Johnson leased the island to the United States government for $500 a year. It was tightly kept. In fact, Leonard Johnson and his family needed permission from the government to come and go from the island. They began constructing the island in 1861. The first prisoner arrived in 1862, and it was open throughout the Civil War. It was decommissioned in 1865. After the Civil War, there was a pleasure resort located there for a brief time. All that remains of the Johnson's Island prison today is the cemetery. We're at the grave of Elijah Brown. Elijah Brown was one of the 26 African American men from Sandusky who enlisted in the Massachusetts 55th Regiment. He was born here in Sandusky in 1844, and his occupation was firefighter. A newspaper article in the Sandusky Register told all about the day that the men from the Massachusetts 55th went off to war. The residents of the area had raised more than $5,000 as well as provisions and contributions to send them off. It was an exciting day for these men to join the cause. We're at the grave of Horace Harper Bill. Horace Harper Bill was born here in Sandusky in 1842. He died tragically at the Battle of Antietam on September 17, 1862. Horace Harper Bill was one of those soldiers who wrote a lot of letters home. He was really descriptive, and he wrote a lot of sweet letters to every member of his family. He wrote one letter to his sister Rose where he described his tent as a castle, making the best of the situation. The first burial at Oakland Cemetery took place in 1850. With the burial of Morris Farwell, Sandusky's first mayor, Oakland Cemetery became Sandusky's official burying ground. There are thousands of people buried here in Oakland Cemetery, each one of them with their own special story to tell. I hope that you've enjoyed this visit with us today to Oakland Cemetery to explore some of Sandusky's Civil War heroes. Thanks for joining us.